Listeners, good people out there, followers of this YouTube channel, welcome to the analysis of the poem Itmo, the poem written by CORRIE. In other name, he is known as Joseph CORRIE. Joseph CORRIE was born in 1894 and died in 1968 in Britain. Before proceeding, I wish to present to you the poem. Here the poem reads. But remember, this poem consists of 2 stanzas, each stanza containing 4 verses. Stanza 1 reads, "Eat more fruit," the slogans say, "more fish, more beef, more bread." But I'm on unemployment pay, my 3rd year now and wed. Stanza 2 reads, "And so I wonder when I will see the slogan when I pass, the only one that would suit me, eat more bloody grass." Dear listeners, I wish to present to you the brief biography of the poet and a short description of the title of this poem, Itmo. Well, CORRIE was a Scottish poet born in 1894 and died in 1968, who once worked as a factory worker and a miner on the other hand in Britain. Basically, he mainly wrote about his life experience as a worker and a miner. And this is a kind reminder as far as function of literature is concerned. Literature does not reflect in a vacuum, rather it mirrors on what society does. So CORRIE wrote this poem reflecting his own society. Hence, his poem refers to the problems of workers. The title of the poem, ironically, urges people to eat more food. But remember, the lower class people can't afford eating more food or living on a balanced diet. It is because the lower class people are poor and unemployed, whereby the persona represents the class of poor people. Dear listeners, we are going to be guided with questions in analyzing this poem. Question number 1. What is the poem all about? Listeners, the poem is about a man who protests against the commercial slogans which keep on advertising foods, especially balanced diet, that he cannot afford to buy because he is unemployed. Therefore, the persona is angry and he thinks the government is being hypocritical because it advertises the slogans that do not suit him. That is to say, the authority seems to be hypocritical to poor people, or the lower class people represented by the persona who is lamenting in the poem, Why is he lamenting? He is exploited and oppressed by the commercial slogan that demands him to eat more while he is unemployed and he is leading a poor life. Question number 2. What kind of poem is this? Dear listeners, remember before I have briefly presented that the poem is short but revealing or expressing strong feelings of the persona. Remember, short poems revealing strong feelings of the persona are what are referred to as lyric poem. Therefore, this poem is a lyric of its kind because it is short and expresses the strong feelings of the persona about the slogan. In other words, the poem can be regarded as a reflective poem because it reflects the real life situation existing in the society of the poet. What is that real life situation? It is the life characterized by poor living condition and the hypocrisy of the government. The poem tells us that there is life inequality, where some suffer while others prosper. The lower class suffers from poor living condition while the upper class prospers by enjoying the national cake, and they exploit or oppress the lower class, the people, by demanding them to eat more while their life condition seems to be unfavorable. Listeners, basing on rhyming pattern, this poem can also be termed as traditional poem because the poem strictly follows all the rules of writing poems. What are those all the rules of writing poems? They include number of verses in each stanza. Remember, the poem comprises of 4 verses in each stanza. But also the poem strictly observes rhyme pattern. Rhyme seems to be regular, but also the number of syllables are similar throughout the poem. Question number 3. What is the tone and mood of the poem? What is the voice quality and the feeling of readers? How readers feel after reading this poem? What is referred to as mood? Well, the tone of the poem is sad at the beginning of the poem. Why the persona feels sad? It is because the persona is unemployed. To prove this, the persona says, "But I am on unemployment pay, my 3rd year now and wed." This is an indicator of sadness. But in the second stanza, the tone becomes more serious and angry as the persona decides to protest against the unfair slogan. Additionally, the mood of this poem is sad, unhappy, and angry because the persona provokes sadness feeling to readers, unhappy mood and angry mood to readers as well because of the unfairness of this commercial slogan. Question number 4 demands to comment on the structure of this poem. Basically, commenting on the structure of the poem, we here observe the number of stanzas in a poem, but also the number of verses that make up the poem. Referring to this poem, the poem is divided into 2 stanzas, with each stanza having 4 verses. Question number 5. Comment on sound devices or musical features. What are some rhythmical features? What are some musical features that have been employed by this poet? Remember, sound devices or musical features are used by poets to not only to entertain readers or ensuring musicality of the poem, but also conveying the intended message to the audience. For any poem to be sung well, musical features must strictly be used by poets. Ladies and gentlemen, the first sound device used in this poem is rhyme. Rhyme refers to the similarity of sounds at the end of consecutive verses. In this poem, rhyme is balanced because in both first and second stanza there are sounds which rhyme. For example, say and pay. In words say and pay, the sound A at the end, say, in say, pay, the sound A can be heard at the end of these words. Some other 2 rhyming words include bread and wed. Bread and wed. The sound ed can be heard at the end of these 2 words. They have the same ending. Another musical device used is rhythm. Rhythm refers to the pattern of syllables in a poem, whereby it is identified through stressed and unstressed syllables. Dear listeners, because this poem is regarded as traditional poem, therefore it is safe to comment that the poem has a rhythm or regular rhythm because it comprises of patterns of stressed and unstressed syllables. It is because the number of syllables are similar in each rhyme. As far as rhyme scheme is concerned, the poem has regular rhyming scheme or patterns. This is because the poem has a rhyme scheme of AB throughout the poem. Hence, it creates the rhythm of the poem. Another musical or sound device used is alliteration. Alliteration is the musical device in which there is similarity in syllabic sound, or there is similarity in consonant sound at the beginning of stressed words in a verse or line. Alliteration can be evident in this poem when the poet says, more fish, more beef, more bread. Sounds and br can be identified in this verse. Another musical device used in this poem is assonance. What is assonance? Assonance simply refers to the repetition of vowel sounds in similar vowel sounds in a verse. Assonance is evident in this poem in the following verse. The persona states, more fish, more beef, more bread. The sound O has been used to imply alteration. Another musical device used is repetition. Listeners, the poet uses lexical repetitions to mean that some words have been repeated, mainly for emphasis, emphasizing on a significant images. For instance, words and phrases like more and eat more have been repeated to emphasize the message conveyed. Question number 6 demands to comment on the language use. Ladies and gentlemen, the language used is simple language, and his choice of words has helped to maintain the rhyme scheme. The poet's choice of words reflects hopeless situation and anger. For example, the verse that states, "But I am on an unemployment pay and eat more bloody grass." These two verses signify hopelessness and the angry mood of the persona himself. To further language use, the poet has made the use of figures of speech. What are the figures of speech employed in this poem? What is the figurative language used in this poem? The first figure of speech is personification. What is personification? It is a figure of speech that gives human attributes to inanimates or non-living organisms. Personification has been used in this poem when the poet says, "The slogans say." That is to say, slogans have been given human qualities of saying. The slogan cannot say like human beings. Another figure of speech is satire. That is to say, the poet mocks the behavior of the upper class. And to prove this, the persona protests against the unfair slogan by saying, "Eat more blood grass." What does it mean? The persona decides to propose his own slogan that suits his life condition: eating more blood grass. Another figure of speech is imagery. Imagery is a figure of speech that creates images in the minds of readers. The verse "Eat more blood grass" implies an image of sight, an image of vision, because the readers can create image of grass covered with blood. Listeners, another figure of speech employed in this poem is symbolism. The poem is full of symbols to convey message. The first symbol used is the use of words like fish, fruit, beef, and bread. These words have been used to symbolize good life or life prosperity. Remember, people who prosper in life are those who belong in the upper class. This is because these food varieties can be afforded by economically worthwhile people, people who are successful in life, people who are financially good, can afford the aforementioned food varieties. Listeners, another symbol used in this poem is bloody grass. Bloody grass has been used to symbolize poverty. It implies that poor people cannot afford those delicious foodstuffs which are proposed in the slogan. What they can afford is blood grass, food items that can be obtained easily. Listeners, another question demands the reader to identify possible themes in this poem. What are the possible themes in this poem? Well, the first theme to be obtained in this poem is poverty. Poverty is a theme being among of some other more themes that can be identified. When the man in the poem complains that he is unemployed, it is an indicator of poor living condition. And in the last stanza, the poet shows how poor the persona is, and he is desperate to the point of eating blood grass. Another theme is unemployment. Unemployment refers to the state of being unemployed. In this poem, and the society at large, unemployment seems to be rampant. It seems to be common, and the man in this poem complains how unemployed and married people are unemployed. So he cannot afford the expenses of life. In the first stanza, the poet portrays how joblessness denies people of various basic needs. Listeners, another theme to be extracted from this poem is a theme of life inequality, or what can also be termed as social antagonism or classes. The society seems to be antagonistic. How? There are people who are prospering or enjoying the national cake. But on the other hand, we have people who are suffering from poor living condition. The persona is among the sufferers, and he can't afford the foodstuffs proposed by those in power. He finally rejects the slogan and proposes his own in the second stanza. What that slogan? The slogan that suits the persona says, "Eat more blood grass." So this implies that the authority or people of the upper class exploit the lower class people. Another possible theme to be obtained in this poem is a theme of exploitation. How exploitation is evident in this poem. This desperate situation the man is having is because there are others in the society that exploit other people. That is to say, there is someone behind his poor living condition. Exploitation of others leads to the hardship of life, because people like the unemployed ones, like this person in the poem, have no access to resources. That's to say, we have the class that is enjoying by exploiting people who are in the lower class. Another possible theme is a theme of oppression. The leaders or the authority in power are oppressing people of the lower class. At one time, they encourage people to eat the balanced diet, but at another, they do not give them jobs. So it is something discouraging to encourage or to propose someone to eat more or to live on a balanced diet while they are unemployed, they are jobless. So this is a clerical call to the contemporary society to stop the behavior of oppressing innocent people, like what is happening in this poem. Another possible theme is a theme of protest. The man in the poem is complaining about the situation of joblessness and life hardships he faces. He then protests against the hypocrisy of the government. Listeners, some other possible themes to be obtained from this poem include awareness, corruption, irresponsibility of leaders, selfishness, hypocrisy, and conflict. Listeners, what do you learn from the poem? This is another question. Well, the poem presents to us enough lessons and messages to be obtained from it. The first possible lesson to obtain from this poem states, whenever there is unjustifiable condition, people should be prepared to protest or react, like what is done in the poem. The persona protests against injustice in his society by proposing his own slogan. Another lesson to be obtained. It states, the presence of unemployment, classes, exploitation, and irresponsibility in the societies has various impacts to the people. And when these are dominant, people become desperate and they lose hope they once had before for their leaders or government. Another lesson states, the government or authority should consider the life situations of citizens before proposing different slogans, because some are not able to meet them, like what is identified to the persona. The last lesson to be obtained from this poem, people and the government support should work hard to alleviate poverty and unemployment. So, in order to avoid these two problems, people should work hard to fight against poor living condition. But the government should support them by providing employment and the like. The last question demands to identify whether this poem is relevant in this poem. To identify whether this poem is relevant to what is happening in the society, specifically Tanzanian society. Is this poem reflecting what is happening in Tanzania? Is this poem a replica of what is happening in the contemporary society? Well, this poem is relevant to Tanzanian society or any other society, as the themes depicted are applicable even to Tanzanian society. We have witnessed the slogans like kuleni chakula bora, nyama, samaki, maziwa, as proposed by the government. However, most Tanzanians cannot afford those food varieties in the so-called balanced proportion. It is because the majority of Tanzanians seem to be poor, suffering from poor living condition, like malnutrition, especially to rural people or people living in the village side of the country. But remember, an interesting story is that the government has been trying people's life situation through different policies. Some different policies are proposed by the government. However, there is still a long way to go because the infrastructure is still poor. So some policies seem to be irrelevant because there is poor infrastructure that cannot support the implementation of such policies. Agricultural development is still at low level and unemployment is high. In the society of today, there are unemployed people. This has been the major problem, growing to be one of the burning problems in Tanzanian societies, because the large number of graduates of universities and colleges faces the problem of unemployment. So the government is advised to put some measures behind solving this problem. Even the employed ones cannot live within their income. So the government should upgrade the life status of the employed ones as well by raising up the salaries that could make them to face their life's demands. Lastly, dear listeners, I wish to present to you the vocabularies used with their meanings. Vocabularies used in this poem with their meanings. The first vocabulary is bloody as an adjective. Bloody. Blood has been very commonly used in the United Kingdoms. In the United Kingdom or in Britain, it has been a very common vocabulary. It is a slang that is considered offensive. It is used to show stress, anger, or annoyance. Also, in the United Kingdom, it is used as a swear word to add emphasis on something. It has been evident in this poem when the persona expresses his anger towards the unfair slogan by saying, in the last stanza, when he proposes his own slogan, the persona says, "The only one that would suit me, eat more bloody grass." It is some sort of expressing anger and emphasis. Another vocabulary used in this poem is the vocabulary suit. As a verb, suit has been used to mean to be appropriate to somebody or something. For example, this jeans suits you. This jeans seems to be appropriate or seems to favor your body. The last vocabulary used in this poem is the vocabulary wet. Wet is a verb to mean marrying somebody. Listeners, this marks the end of my today's presentation of the poem Eat More by Joseph CORRIE. Thank you very much for your maximum attention from the beginning of this analysis until this far end. Thank you.